Hello, and welcome to another edition of Storytelling on Orchard Street. I'm your host, Pete Salamita. We're in the broadcast, the podcast studios of P&T Knitwear Bookstore, 180 Orchard Street, hence the name. Read good books. Come to P&T Knitwear. Check it out. They got great titles for you to peruse and hopefully buy, and an excellent cafe in the back and events. So check the events calendar. But with me in the studio today, my guest is Maria. Oh, I heard you say it.
Giura.
Giura. You know, I would never get that looking at this. I was going to.
Don't worry, I have a long history of.
Well, good.
Yes.
That'll be one of my first questions then. Maria is the author of Celibate, a memoir, which won a first-place Independent Press Award, and What My Father Taught Me, a finalist for the Paterson Poetry Book Prize. Her writing has appeared in New York Quarterly, Prime Number 170, Liguorian, Presence, Midstory, Voices in Italian Americana, Lips, and the Paterson Literary Review. An Academy of American Poets winner, Maria has taught writing at multiple universities, including Binghamton University, where she received her PhD in English. She currently teaches writing workshops for Casa Belvedere Cultural Foundation. Welcome to the studio, Maria.
Thank you so much, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Or maybe just a little
closer. You got it.
Okay. I want to make sure I hear you. Mm-hmm. Very important, since you're the star of the show today. So that was a lot. You got a lot going on here. So we're going to get to all of that. But let's talk a little bit about your background, how you became interested in writing, the early years, family life, if you'd like to talk about that. Obviously, you wrote a book about your father. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm interested especially about that. A baker?
He is, yeah. He and my mother owned an Italian pastry shop for many years of my childhood, Savarese, in Brooklyn.
Right.
Yeah.
You were born and raised in Brooklyn?
I was born and raised in Brooklyn.
Okay.
In fact, I was born I was born in a hospital.
Well, yeah, of course.
But we lived above the pastry shop for the first year of my life.
Okay.
Yes.
That must have smelled, well, you probably don't remember. But.
I don't remember that. And what I do remember is that we had all these delicious Italian delicacies, pastry delicacies, and I always wanted the American dessert.
Oh,
I always wanted the Carvel ice cream cake for birthday.
Well, you were a kid.
Exactly.
Did you know that I owned a bakery for a year and a half?
I did not.
Yeah, see?
Wow. You do a lot also, Pete.
Yes. First, I also want to acknowledge how we met. We met at the Italian American Writers Association, which I just joined. That was my first night being there, was when I met you.
Yes.
I missed the last one. I hope to go to the next one. You go every time?
No.
Yeah.
I hadn't been there in a while the night that we met.
Uh-huh.
So that was great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are both your parents Italian?
They are both. They both were born in Italy.
Cool.
They're Southern Italian.
Nice.
My father is from the Basilicata region of Italy, and my mother is from Sicily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Do you speak Italian?
I shamefully don't.
Me neither.
I'm ashamed of it.
Well, I'm a third generation. My grandparents came here. Mm-hmm. And my parents didn't really know Italian. I think back then, my mother was born in 20 and my father in 21. I think it was just they were trying to be American, mm-hmm. So they didn't really, although they kept to some of the Italian traditions.
Yeah.
I think there was a little, backlash a little bit back then to be an Italian.
They did speak Italian. They spoke Italian to each other, to their parents.
Right.
So there would have been an opportunity if I had applied myself a little bit more.
I see. Okay.
But it wasn't spoken in the home. It wasn't spoken to us.
Right.
Yes.
Got it. When you were a kid, were you interested in the arts?
I have been writing poetry, I think, since at least 8th grade.
Well, okay.
I would say was the beginning part.
Right.
And then throughout high school and college, writing for the literary magazine, editing.
So you're a long-time writer.
It goes back a while.
Right.
Yeah. But
besides poetry, you wrote non-poetry
memoir,
books.
prose, right,
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
But I really do tend to write personal narratives, autobiography. I don't really write fiction. I tried it once.
Sure.
It's
a different
doesn't
style.
Come that naturally to me.
Right.
So I've stuck with what comes more naturally.
Right.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Were you interested in other forms of art as a
Well, I mean, I think like a lot of kids, I was exposed to music. You know, I took piano lessons, didn't stick with it,
Okay.
but there was, an exposure to it, dance lessons, things like that. But I didn't stick with it. Writing is the art that I stuck with.
Well, it got you all the way here, So what's well, maybe I'm jumping around too much. So you you said you went to Binghamton?
I did for my PhD.
Oh, PhD.
Yes, yeah,
Right.
and that the reason I was drawn there, Pete, was that they offered and still do a creative dissertation.
Okay.
So you have the option of being on a traditional track of writing research on someone else's writing or working on your own creative work, whether it's a novel, a fiction, play, etc., or memoir. And I used that as an opportunity to write my memoir, or at least the very early version of it.
Right.
It gave me the time and the discipline,
Sure.
and also being surrounded by other people who were doing the same.
And you got support from the teachers, and I would imagine.
Yes, exactly,
right.
exactly.
I think you're not the first guest that had something come out of that tract. Yeah.
But it was a very different book.
Okay.
Like that, it was, I was able to successfully defend it and get my PhD, but that was many years before Celibate was actually published.
I see.
So it went
through.
through.
Why don't you hold it up to the camera?
Sure. So it was.
That was the first book?
Oh, so my first book is what my father taught
okay.
me. That's the collection of poetry
Right. I
published
see.
by Bordigetta Press.
Okay.
And then this was my second book, Celibate, the memoir, which was, what I wrote for my dissertation. But the difference between the dissertation and this is night and day.
Okay.
Mainly because I was writing around the story. I mean, it had a narrative arc. It had a beginning, middle, and end, and the character development. But I wasn't really getting to the story because I was afraid.
Mm-hmm.
I was really afraid. In fact,
Afraid of what?
telling the story that I tell in this book is that I fall in love with a Catholic priest in my late 20s.
And is it based on?
It's based on that.
Wow.
And
I mean, it really happened.
it really happened.
Wow,
It really happened because it's memoir.
Are you a deeply religious person, or?
I am.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I was finding my way.
Right.
But since then, yes.
Right.
Like I get a lot from my faith. I don't know what I would do without my faith.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's a pretty intense experience.
It was an intense experience.
Right.
And there's a whole other family story that is thematically connected to falling for the priest. And I was just afraid to write all of that. You
fell for him, but it was just something you wished for, not actually.
No, we fell in love with each other and had a relationship.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
And did he stay in the priesthood?
I hesitate to give too much away. I don't know if you want, I hesitate to give too much away.
Right, because you want people to read your book and not know
I mean,
all
I'll
the
give
answers.
more as we discuss. Yeah.
Right, sure.
Right,
okay.
yeah.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
It is. And so it took a lot
this was it was before your PhD?
No, it was during the PhD.
Oh.
And I was trying to write the story while I was still living it.
Wow.
So that was
That's
also
intense.
really problematic.
Right.
And I was having a hard time really writing the truth. I thought I was.
So what did the school think?
The school
Was it not that clear that it was what you were writing
I'll tell you this much, that my dissertation director, who's a very, very straightforward woman, Leslie Haywood, and a very accomplished woman, from the drafts that she read of my work, she said to me, "Why don't the two of you just get together already?"
Oh.
But it was more complicated than that, because certainly there have been priests who have fallen in love, and and they might leave the priesthood.
Right.
This wasn't that clear cut.
Right. Well, that's a big decision to make.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine he spent a lot of time to get where he was.
Right. Exactly. But I think the point she was trying to make was twofold. Why aren't the two of you getting together? But also, I was not really writing the full story, and that's her reaction to it was, I was kind of angelicizing and idolizing and idealizing him in those drafts.
Right.
I wasn't really writing the characters that we really were, because I was still trying to figure it out.
Right.
So for me, writing is...
Did you go for your PhD right from undergrad?
No. No, and I didn't even go for my PhD right after my graduate degree.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I was working.
Right.
And then I left work and went full-time for
So
my
what kind of work
PhD.
were you doing in between?
I was, so for many years, I worked in a college administration. I was in admissions and then career development. And then I started teaching
I see.
in college as
Okay,
well.
right.
Yeah.
Teaching literature.
Literature,
Right.
writing, first year writing,
Right.
sometimes memoir, sometimes creative nonfiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And were you writing, published writer at that point?
In Binghamton, I had a few poems published, yes.
Right.
Yes, but nothing of prose yet.
Right. I mean, I don't know if it says it here, but did you do all your studies at Binghamton, or did you?
No, I have my undergraduate at Wagner College, my master's at the City University of New York,
Oh, okay.
and then
Where's Wagner?
Wagner's on Staten Island.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I don't think I've heard of that. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what kind of time period are we talking?
So we fell in love. I was in my late 20s, and he
Okay.
was 4 years older than I was. And the writing life was before, during, and after him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Does he know there's a book?
He does know there's
So
a book.
Are you still in touch?
Not really.
Right.
No, he
Ha-
just knows that there's a book. Yeah.
How did it end? Maybe you can't. You don't want to say.
I'm going to avoid that, but I'll answer
Right.
lots of other questions about
Sure.
it. But I think that part I will leave
Okay.
for
Okay.
possible readers.
So, how do you feel about maybe reading something at this point,
Yeah.
and then we could do more talking?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have just like I'm going to start with the very opening of the book, which is under 2 minutes.
Okay.
Because it maybe be clearer for your readers.
Okay.
So chapter 1 is called The Long Loneliness,
All right.
which is actually the title of the autobiography by Dorothy Day,
Okay.
who's up for sainthood. The Long Loneliness. I first noticed Father Infanzi in the way that matters during his second year at St. Stephen's. It's not that I hadn't noticed him before. It was impossible not to. He was 30, 4 years older than me, tall and lean with black hair parted to the side, and he said beautiful things like God loved us into existence. But it wasn't until my sister Janine introduced him to my family after Easter Sunday Mass that he really got my attention. It was a cool, sunny day with the fragrance of daffodils in the air as we waited on a long line to greet Father outside the front doors. When it was our turn, we all smiled and said hello, and my stepdad, Tom, complimented his homily. Father said, "Thank you," and then shaking our hands and blushing, said to my sisters and me, "Wow, 4 girls. You all have the same blue eyes." But when he got to me, he held my eyes a beat longer than he did theirs, and I felt a sharp pulse of attraction. After we walked away, my sister Julie said, without a hint of irony, he'd be perfect for Maria.
Wow.
Nellie, the youngest, rolled her eyes, and my mother shot back, "Julie," but with a smirk. I nearly gasped. He was perfect, smart and handsome and personable, but also a touch shy to make him sweet. He made me feel more special in that moment than the men I dated. After that, whenever he said Mass, I thought, good, but walked out the side door and didn't greet him. He was a priest. Besides, the last thing I wanted to be reminded of was celibacy. I've been running from it ever since I was 8, and sitting in St. Bernadette's church one night, I felt God calling me to become a nun.
Okay. Wow.
I'll end there for now.
That's a good start. So did your family, was this a secret, or did other people know, or?
So some people suspected it,
Right.
And didn't want to believe it. And it wasn't until years later when I opened up and came clean about it
Right.
that then it was confirmed for them. But later on in the book, the reader finds out that my stepdad Tom, who I named Tom in the book, who's mentioned here, he did suspect it all along. And he said something to my mother, but she begged him not to say anything to me because she didn't believe anything was going on, or
Okay.
didn't want to believe it.
Sure.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, it's a very conflicting thing. I guess you think different people would have different people would have different views of it.
Exactly. And I think that has happened because the book has been out for a while now.
Right.
And there's been different reactions from family, a couple of family members who have been angry about it. Not so much that I fell in love with the priest, but maybe the way that I told the story, because I do go into a decent amount of detail.
Okay.
And I think what's also really hard is that, and maybe Pete, you understand something about this too, that Southern Italian ethic is that what happens in the family stays in the family.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not just writing about
Right.
my relationship, which was enough, right? I'm also writing about my childhood, you know, and my father's emotional absence and how that was part, not all.
So you
part
mentioned
of the reason.
stepfather. Where was your birth father?
So my birth father is still alive and well.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
Right.
still alive and well. And
And your parents?
my mom is still alive and well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my stepdad I don't have anymore. He
I
passed
see.
away. Yes.
But your parents got divorced?
They did, and they
'Cause
both
that's uncommon.
remarried. They both remarried.
right.
Yes, it was very uncommon.
If they're very Catholic Italian.
Right, and the time
I'm
period.
Catholic Italian too.
Yeah, and they both remarried.
Wow.
So,
How old were you when that happened?
when they remarried, it was later on.
I mean, when they
I was 9.
when they got divorced.
Yes.
Was that a traumatic experience?
You know, at the time, I didn't think so. But now, when I wrote the memoir, and I spent so many years,
And in this book.
right. You know, trying to reflect on what were my motivations in being attracted to this particular man. You know, a priest, but then this particular priest, and.
Right.
When I went back, there was a lot of void. You know, my father's emotional absence.
Right. So when your parents split, was he around or?
He was around.
Right.
He was around. And even before they split, he was a workaholic, which I think, again, is not so unusual for some Italian immigrant fathers.
Right.
He was a workaholic. He believed that really...
The father was the baker or your stepfather?
No, my father.
Right.
My father, my mother, together.
Right. Oh, you said that. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what was I saying? He believed that except for providing for us financially and taking care of us, which he did really wonderfully, Pete, I want to underscore that.
Sure.
He worked so hard. He really believed that raising kids was my mother's job.
I mean, that's how it was in my family too.
Yeah.
Yeah. My father was, well, I don't know if, I think he's a workaholic. I mean, I lost both parents they were in the 90s.
Okay.
But
so
he was a
it's been
workaholic,
while.
but he had to be. Had 7 kids.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you had 4. It was 4.
Yes,
one of 4.
I'm one of 4.
Right. No boys in the
No.
family. Yeah. We were almost split down the middle for 7. It was 4 and 3. 4 boys and 3 girls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big family.
But back then, I mean, definitely for Italian families, Italian Catholic families. But I was born in '57, so and I have older siblings. So '50s, '60s. It was more like that. I mean, the father generally worked and the mother stayed home, especially in a big family like that.
Right.
And my father was not college educated, or I actually didn't finish high school. So yeah, he had to work.
Right.
He had full-time job and all kinds of part-time jobs. So, and in your case, if your father had a bakery, if you had food business, it's a full-time and it's all day.
Yeah, it was kind of 24/7.
Yeah,
and
pretty much.
Even when he didn't have to work that much anymore, he still did.
Right.
Well,
how long did he have the bakery for?
At least 20 years.
Right.
And then when he sold the bakery to my uncle, then he took on other businesses. He owned an Italian cafe, a Scandinavian bakery, a Russian restaurant. So he really...
Scandinavian bakery, where
Yes.
did that come from?
This is what he's good at, what he was good at. Obviously he's retired now for a while, but it's what he knew.
Right.
Was running food business.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And when he was home, he was exhausted.
Right.
Of
course.
I have
work
these
like that. That's hard work.
Yeah, you're on your feet.
I was a chef for 20 years, so.
Oh, okay. So
It's hard work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'd have tender moments, like he'd want me to come and sit with him on his recliner.
Right.
And I would go, but I knew he'd fall asleep, and then I'd kind of be locked in his arms.
Right.
So he wasn't somebody that I could confide in. That was going to be more my mother.
Right.
And I think later on I missed that. I understand it.
Right.
And this is like what I come to, the understanding that I come to in both books, by the end of both books, is that I understand.
Right.
But I felt it. I felt the void.
Right.
And combine that with the fact that I was a single woman, obviously, when I met the priest.
Right.
And not successfully single. Like I was unsuccessfully dating, and it just wasn't going well.
Right.
And here was this priest who was smart. He said things like I mentioned in the open, God loved us into existence, which is a C.S. Lewis quote. And at the time, I wasn't feeling particularly loved.
Right. Did he teach or no? It was just a...
No,
okay,
I mean, not at that point. No,
Right,
he
okay.
wasn't teaching. Yeah.
Right.
So he appealed to me spiritually, certainly physically. He was good looking. Attention wise, it was very heady and very painful.
Right.
Yeah. And it took a long time. So Celibate's really about my 10-year struggle to figure the relationship out and kind of...
It went on for 10 years?
Well, off and on,
Okay.
not the physical part of it,
Right.
but the
So
emotional.
after you finished school, it was still...
Yeah,
still
for a
going
little
on.
while longer, yes. Yeah.
But when you finished school, you were working there or...
I was teaching.
Right.
I was teaching.
At Binghamton.
Well, no, then I went and taught at Montclair State in New
that's
Jersey.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then that it was ending around that point.
I see.
So, yeah.
Right.
But it took a long time to unravel the knots that I had gotten myself tied up in.
Right.
Yeah.
Where were you in the line of your sisters?
I am third born.
Okay.
So 2 older, 1 younger.
Right.
Yes, yeah. And not close in age. So my second oldest sister is 6 years older than me, and my youngest sister is 8 years younger than me.
That's a long
Gap.
gap.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do any of them write or...
Any of them write? I think they have it in them. They don't write regularly,
Right.
but a couple of them do have the knack for it.
Right.
Yes.
Are you close to them?
We
or-
are close.
Okay. And
yeah.
they're all in the area?
Well, one sister lives in upstate New York,
I see.
but the rest of us are close by.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you've been a Brooklyn girl pretty much your whole life,
Except for when I lived in Binghamton.
Right.
Yes.
And Montclair too. I guess.
Well, I didn't live in Montclair.
Oh, you
but but I was born and raised in Brooklyn.
Right.
Yeah, and Diker Heights, which
Right.
a lot of the poems in my first book, or enough of the poems, are about Brooklyn and Diker Heights because
Right.
I loved that neighborhood. I
Yeah, it
loved
seems like
growing
a
up.
great neighborhood. I mean, I know it mostly for the Christmas decorations.
Oh yes.
That
craziness though didn't exist when I was growing up.
No,
that happened after.
No,
the
I
fact.
know.
Yeah.
I mean, I went the first time I went. Oh God, it must have been 30 years ago.
Okay.
So, and I don't think it was already kind of crazy, but I don't think it's like it is now.
Right.
It got really like as years go. It's like everything else. Like the Mermaid Parade was just on the boardwalk.
Yes.
And there was a handful of people, and then
Right.
and now it's like I don't know how many people go.
Right.
100,000 or whatever,
Exactly.
10,000.
Yeah. But it was the kind of neighborhood where I could.
Do you live in Diker Heights now?
No, I don't.
Oh,
I
okay.
live in Staten Island.
Oh, you said
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, all right. So no
Yeah.
longer a Brooklyn girl.
No longer.
But pretty close.
Yeah, it's very, very close.
Just
very
over
close.
the bridge.
Yes.
And your mom?
A Staten Island as well.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yep.
All right.
Mhm. Yeah. And the neighborhood was such a great one to grow up in. I mean, and it was safe for us. Like at 8 years old, I was
Sure.
walking to everything on my own.
Right.
You know.
Well, we did that. I mean,
Yeah.
I grew up in the suburbs, Rockville Center.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah. It was funny because it's so different now. Your mother would just open the door and say, "Get out."
Exactly. See you in
And
about
you
8 hours.
Isn't that weird? It's so hard to. No one like raising kids now could understand that.
Can understand it, and I don't think they can do it.
And of course, no, you're not allowed to do it.
Yeah.
And obviously, there was no cell phones, so I can't imagine like knowing for 8 hours not knowing when your kid is like
Yeah.
little kid. I'm talking about it like
Right,
we were just
right.
elementary school kids,
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
would just go out and come back. You had to be home when the street lights went on. I think.
I mean, I think I had to be
Something
home
like that.
before then.
Oh, yeah.
But in general, I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
You know.
You had to be, and don't be
Yeah.
late for dinner or all hell to,
Right.
to pay.
It was safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was very, very Italian American. I think it's actually still is, but like stores were named after like Joe Torre's Sports Shop and Mona Lisa Bakery.
Wow. Right.
The church that was really special to me is the Shrine Church of St. Bernadette. And my mother would send me out to the Salumeria to get both Italian and American bread.
Wow.
And Pete, it was a long time before I realized that not everybody called sliced bread American bread.
Oh.
We did because we were distinguishing it
Right.
from the Italian bread.
American bread. That's funny.
That's
I never heard
how
that.
much of an enclave it was.
Right,
That it,
right.
I didn't know that.
Right. So
you know?
sandwich bread was American bread.
It was American bread.
And are you talking about, was it
like
still...
Wonder or
like,
Wonder
really?
bread.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like Wonder bread.
Yeah, we had that too. It was such a weird product. I can't remember the last time I had it.
I know.
I remember as a kid, we used to ball it up and throw it at each other because it would really...
It was too, yeah, it was
It's
too
really
spongy.
it's really not food.
Right,
I don't know.
right.
I don't know what it is.
Right, but
and it still exists.
Sure.
When I was young, I used to go to thrift stores, and I actually have a Wonder Bread, like a delivery person's shirt.
Like logo.
With the logo and stripes and the balloons, and his name is Rusty. I got it at a thrift store, but
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, so it's retro. It's almost kind of retro
Yeah,
now, right?
well, I got this. I got this in Williamsburg before people knew where Williamsburg was. It was a big thrift store. So we're talking about like the late 80s, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was an old thing. Any chance you would read a poem from the book
Sure.
about your father?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I'll actually read the title poem.
Okay. Cool.
Which doesn't focus on Brooklyn specifically.
Right.
But sure. So it's called What My Father Taught Me.
Right.
And that's the title poem.
By the way, are these books available?
They are available, yeah.
Where?
In the usual places, Amazon, but also from the publisher. This is Bordighera Press.
Okay.
And this is Apprentice House Press,
Nice.
which is based out of Loyola University in Maryland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What My Father Taught Me. Am I looking at you or am I looking at the camera? Maybe I should have asked this before the...
You're doing good. Just make you're looking at
Look at
me
you.
because
Okay,
then
you
it's
got
the
it.
microphone.
You
Yeah,
got it,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. We'll hear you better that way.
What my father taught me. My father never taught me how to fish or play ball or dance, how to do repairs in the house or talk to a repairman so I wouldn't get taken for a fool. He never taught me how to change oil or a tire or even windshield wiper fluid. He never read me a bedtime story or asked me about school. In the morning when I sat on his lap, he'd kiss my hair and call me Bella. But when I tried to tell him something, he'd look at the clock, jump up, and nearly drop me. After he and my mother separated, when it was his day to take me and Annie, he'd sometimes cancel, leaving us in our dresses and barrettes, holding hands. I'm not sure I can finish this poem. What do fathers teach their daughters? He gave what he could. Headlock kisses, 18-karat gold, the newest electronic gadgets. He wrote to us on layered birthday cakes he made with his hands, our names in delicate pink icing in his squared European handwriting. He held me high in his arms on that one vacation to Italy with my mother when I was 4 and clung to him in St. Mark's Square, afraid of the pigeons. Held his hand on my leg when I was atop an elephant at the zoo, my lips pursed with fear. Years later, whenever I visit him and my stepmother, he always asks me, how's the car running? How many miles? To this day, he brings my mother sfingi and zeppoli on her name day, loaves of bread and 7 layers anytime he's in the neighborhood. Asks me when I speak to him on the phone, how's mama? The same bakery that stole my father from us gave me a man who could pay attention long enough to make something beautiful, who helped me to grow up and write about him.
I love that. It's a great ending. Yeah, it's funny because, my father was the same way. I mean, he really didn't interact with us a whole lot, and but I think that's somewhat of the time. And we both had fathers that worked a lot of hours, but it was different back then.
Yeah.
Parents weren't as involved in their kids' life, but especially 4 and 7 kids. It's really hard to
Right.
a parent to split it up that way. I only had one son,
Okay.
one kid.
I don't.
No.
I'm single, no children.
Right. Okay. It's so different. And when I think about it, like for the most part, I mean, we had like game nights. There was interaction with the parents. I'm not gonna say there weren't. We used to go so my mother was always home, and we would have she would have her sisters over. They lived in Rockville Center, and then we play with the cousins. It was that kind of a thing. Or you might go to the beach.
Yeah.
But the parents would be separate with, you know, their
Adults,
the
the other
adults,
adults, yeah.
and the kids would go and do something. And I think about it, it's like for the most part, the only time I had alone time with my mother would be if she was taking me shopping for new clothes for school, right?
Yeah.
And then with my father, it was like, you know, sometimes I would go and be his helper because he had side jobs and he would like help people with their yards or whatever. And it was that. It was
Right.
it was just like those things,
Yes,
basically.
yes.
Otherwise, I didn't get any alone time with. And whereas with my son, it was all the time. We both me and my wife.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's so different.
It is very different. Yes. Yeah.
And for you, it was more different because after 9, your father was even more. Like, did you still see him on a regular basis? I mean, it must be hard.
Pretty much so.
Right.
I mean, probably not as regular as I should have.
Right.
But yeah, no, he was in the picture. He was
Right.
around.
And how far how close did you live to the bakery?
Not far. Maybe
Right.
about 20, 25 blocks.
Did you spend time there? Like, did you would go
Well,
visit
as
him
a
at
small
work?
as a small child, I was in the playpen in the bakery.
Oh, okay.
But I think once I was in school, no, just on occasion,
Right.
you know, here and there.
Right.
My older sisters were in the bakery a lot more
Okay.
and worked there.
Well, okay. You never worked there,
I didn't. No, I worked in that Scandinavian bakery for 1 year.
Okay, right.
But not in Savarese. And I actually did have some time with my mother alone. There were periods of time where she didn't work in the bakery,
Right.
and before she had my youngest sister.
Right, because there was a big gap.
Yeah, so I did
and
have some.
And your older sisters were a lot older. So,
A lot older, and they were also.
So you probably got more alone time than I did with
Yes.
my mother. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're very close in age, the
Okay.
two oldest sisters, so they
Right.
kind of had each other.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You were
so-
almost a middle child, kind of.
Right, right.
even
And
though
in
it's 4.
some ways, not entirely, but almost an only child for some
sure.
for
Yeah.
some intents
In
and
some
purposes.
ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
Right.
that period of time. Yeah.
Right. I'm just curious. Are you in the works of a new book, or what are you doing currently?
Yeah, so I teach writing, memoir writing workshops for Casa Belvedere.
Is that a
which
full time?
It's not. It's not
Okay.
a full time.
Right.
It's a cultural foundation on Staten Island.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it because I get to select other people's writings around topics and themes. And the participants who join in, we read the pieces together, and then we use it as a springboard for them to write their own work.
That's not attached to a school.
It's not.
Right.
No, it's a cultural foundation.
Right. And what population are you working with?
So mostly retired, but not entirely. Actually, it's a nice kind of mix. There's some people who are still working, and
So
they're
adults and older adults.
Adults, yes,
Right.
adults and older adults.
And
Correct.
are they generally people that always wanted to write, never got a chance to, or
Yes,
most-
but some of them are already published writers, so it's also a really nice mix.
right? So if they're published writers, what are they getting out of the workshop?
They are writing more. It gives them an opportunity to write more because, you know, I don't know about you, Pete. Like with writing, it's not going to just happen magically. You do have to set. I mean, sometimes it does. Sometimes things will come to us, right?
That's the only way I write. Actually.
Oh, that's
No,
wow.
I never. Well, I mean, I'm just writing. I'm not writing books for one thing, and I'm writing poetry, and it's. I like to think of it as like almost like folk poetry. You know, and it's mostly narratives. Sometimes it's not.
Yeah, I've been reading them
Yeah.
on
Right.
Facebook.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm a latecomer. I didn't start right. So for a while, I said this the last time, but it's kind of funny because for a long time, I was telling my history wrong as far as when I started to write. And you know how Facebook gives you memories? Like,
Yes.
so
yes.
I realized, wait, I've been actually writing a little longer than I thought. But I didn't start writing poetry until about 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I didn't get involved in going to readings until about a little more than 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
so I'm a newcomer,
Got it.
despite
yeah.
having a podcast.
Right. Right.
But this is good for me because I learn a lot from other people. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's great.
yeah. But I don't just say, oh, I'm going to sit down and write something.
Okay.
Something comes in my head, and I wrote a book, and I got a second book coming out probably next year. It was all written on the phone.
Oh.
Sometimes I
that's
do
awesome.
editing on the computer, but
Okay.
Because it's always with me, and I get an idea. I could be at work, and I'll write a sentence down, and then later on maybe get back to it, or I'll be riding my bicycle, or
Right.
watching a movie, or listening to a song, or
And it's good because you respond right away.
Right.
Right, because that's key,
Yeah.
I think.
Right.
When you get the inspiration to respond to it right away, to get
Yes.
it down right away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess it comes to us all differently.
Right.
But the participants in my workshop, a lot of them are looking for that time. It's
Are they writing poetry or
a mixture.
yeah,
A mixture.
prose?
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of what I share with them is poetry.
Right.
Just because I can include a lot then because
Right.
it's shorter pieces. But sometimes I also blend in prose as well.
Right. Well, the poem that you read, and I guess that book is almost like a memoir too. It's almost
Right. It's a memoir and poems.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
And almost prose. Like
Yes,
story.
it's narrative,
Yeah,
right?
narrative,
Exactly,
right.
yes, and it's not imagistic and
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah. That's mostly what I do.
right,
I
yeah.
can't do the other. I'm not that educated.
Well, I don't know if that's just. I learned one of my mentors is Maria Mazziotti Gillen. I'm not sure if you are familiar with her. So when I joined Iowa, when I first went to Iowa in my late 20s, it led me to Maria Mazziotti Gillen, and she's been an absolute, for me in my writing life, she's been an absolute force of nature.
Right.
Because up until that point, I was familiar with, poetry that was measured and rhymed.
Sure.
And she really gave me the license that free verse
Right.
and stories that are close to home and close to the bone
Right.
are good stories to tell, like if not the best stories to tell.
Right.
So she was really helpful to me and still is. I'm still taking workshops with her.
Right. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So you go to workshops?
I go to
too? Right.
workshops. Oh, yeah. I need them because otherwise I'm not really writing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I need workshops and I have to set some time aside to sit down to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes inspiration finds you, and sometimes you have to be seated, inviting it in,
Right.
waiting for it.
So you said you mentioned when I asked if you're working on something. So it's the workshop, but are you working on like a
Yes.
project for yourself?
Yes.
Another book.
So I have a third book that's pretty much done,
Oh,
and it'll be
okay.
a second collection of poetry.
Okay.
So now I'm trying to find a publisher.
Got it. And
Yes.
is it just a collection of poems that you've been writing, or is it like focused like that book?
It's still a lot about.
I mean, that book is all the poetry book
Yes.
is all poems about your family life and your
Mostly,
child-
yes.
mostly?
There's some what I would call love poetry to
Right.
Brooklyn, love poetry
Right.
to the divine.
But it's all kind of connected to
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And I would say that this second book of poetry, yes, has strong similarities.
Right.
Yeah, and it just features more of the recent work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're at the stage where you're looking for a publisher.
I am looking for a
Right.
publisher, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's pretty much done, but a publisher would help you edit it, or
I mean, I'm hoping for very few edits at this point because I've been working on it
Can
for
I
a while.
see the poetry book? Because
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
wanted to see a close up of the picture of your father.
Yeah.
I love
And
that.
in fact,
Are there other photos? in
Pete,
here?
if you want that copy, if you think you'll get to it, I'm happy to give it to you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
of course.
for having me as a guest.
I love having a collection of. I'm building up a nice collection of all the poets writers that I've met through this. It's fun. It's fun. I have
Yeah.
a little section in my house for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any work that might be coming out in your new book with you, or no?
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not prepared for that. Actually,
Okay.
I should have thought about that, but I
Right.
didn't. I had
That's okay.
enough to think about
Sure.
with these
Well, you
two.
have a lot here.
Yeah,
Do you want to read something else from the
Sure,
memoir?
sure. You want to? Do you need? Can you give me like a time check? Like
We still got time.
Okay.
We got like at least 15 more minutes or so.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I'm
we
wondering
got
if
plenty
I
of
should
time.
go with something that's a little bit longer. Okay, you know what? I will read this. It's about 9 minutes. Is that too long?
Well, I don't think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you split it up?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
let
we
me-
read like half of it and then we can
You
go
got
back.
it.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll just figure out where to stop.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is still early on in the book. To just kind of fill the readers in, I'm still calling him Father Infanzi. We've been out for coffee twice, though.
Okay.
And so this is the third time.
Right. So when you were going out for coffee, did you know it was a mutual thing, or you just thought you were going to be like for you, you weren't. Were you sure that it was more than just coffee? Like for you, you knew it was more than
question.
coffee. For you, you knew it was you wanted more than just coffee.
Yeah.
Do you think? Did you know that was reciprocated?
I think I sensed it.
Okay.
I think I sensed it. It's so funny because you would think that, after writing a memoir, like here it is in book form, there is still some things like the more time goes by since the book is published, then I kind of forget some things that are in my own book.
Yeah. Oh, I can see that.
I'm like,
right.
whoa.
Right.
I spent so much time writing this.
Right.
And then, I pretty much sensed that we were both attracted to each other.
Okay.
2 nights later on Christmas Eve, I was sitting in front of the creche after midnight mass when Father Infanzi, revved up from saying mass for the largest crowd of the year, asked me to go for coffee again. I had wanted to stay in church, hoping it would give me the courage to finally tell him about my calling, especially given the beautiful homily he'd delivered. After his joke about how Italians know the meaning of the word manger from the order mangia mangia, which got him the big laugh he was looking for. He explained that Christ not only humbled himself by coming as an infant, but also by being lain in a manger where animals ate from. It was the most precious explanation of the incarnation I'd ever heard. But then Father switched to his brother's excitement when his wife gave birth. I had been sitting in the lector seat, so close to the pulpit that if I reached out my arm, I could touch Father's garment, feel his thigh beneath it. My sister Julie and brother-in-law Nick were expecting their first child in a week, the first baby in our family, which made me feel more insecure. When Father ended by explaining that deism is the opposite of Christianity, that God couldn't get more involved in our lives than by taking on our human nature, something inside me broke. How could God ask me to give up marriage and motherhood? Why was he taking care of every other woman but me? I promised not to keep you out too long, Father said, looking at me like an eager boy. You know what, Father? Coffee sounds nice. There was no one in the diner whom I recognized, which I was glad about. Father was wearing a long black coat that made him look so handsome it hurt. He took it off, revealing his cleric's shirt with only the tip of the white tab collar showing, and then stuffed it in the booth and sat down. I stood at the rack near our booth with my coat in my hands so he'd get the hint. Oh gosh, he said, I should be getting that for you. I said, that's okay, as if I hadn't given it any thought. Within minutes, we were drinking coffee and exchanging the gifts we hadn't told each other we were buying. I bought him How Houses Learn, a book about how the character of houses develops over time. I didn't realize it, but I was implying that his character needed developing. When I'd hung around after morning mass the day before, he admitted that he hadn't been an ideal seminarian. And I'm wondering if that's where I should stop for now. Let me see.
That sounds like a good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Just hold that spot so you don't lose it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got it.
Did it take you a long time to get over this? Like, or did you have regrets, or did you wish it had, like, it seems like a hard thing to come to terms with, because any relationship ending would be difficult.
Right.
But if he wasn't a priest, more than likely you would have, there's a good chance you might have been with this person.
I don't know, because if for those who read the book, there's other things that come up.
Okay.
And then the next half of the scene will show that.
Okay.
But yes, it was, and it was also just morally very, very difficult
confusing.
for me.
It must have been confusing.
Yeah, and I, when I deep down I was not feeling great that I was tiptoeing around it with my family.
Yeah.
This was a family.
Right.
He wasn't just a priest.
Well, even
he was
though you
our
were
family
single
priest.
and he's technically, well, it depends on how you want to view it from
Married
a religious
to the
standpoint.
church.
Right. But generally speaking, it's not like you're having an affair with a married man.
Right.
But maybe it's
but it felt
it's
like
deeper.
that.
Yeah.
It felt like that.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it led to a lot of guilt and shame, but it was hard to let go of him.
Right.
It was really hard to let go of him.
And to this day, I wonder why at this point in time priests can't marry.
I know that question comes up. I mean, my book kind of begs that conversation.
Sure.
It's called Celibate, so it always comes up.
Right. Because I don't understand. I mean, I guess it's hard for me to understand. I'm not really a practicing Catholic, but I was raised that way. I guess, I don't know. I mean, it seems like you could do both in life, but I don't know. I guess there's different thoughts on that.
Right.
That could be positives come out of it, and I guess there could be confusion too.
Yeah. It's certainly, if you're not called to it and if you're not psychologically healthy, it could not be good, as we have seen from the terrible scandal in the church. Right. I think when somebody is truly called to it and is psychologically healthy, and seminaries are doing a good job of screening people, I think it's a legitimate and valuable way to live a life. But I understand, I understand the questions that come up, and even just the shortage in the priesthood. And we wonder, would that help? If priests were allowed to marry, or married priests were allowed to, or married men were allowed to become priests, would that help? And so it's, I know it's a big question for people.
Sure.
Yeah.
So now that you have this book and you're reading from it, does it bring back these conflicts for you?
No.
Or is
it doesn't.
No,
it doesn't. Thankfully,
how long ago was that?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, the book was published 5 years ago.
Oh, I see.
Right. So it was published in October of 2019. So this year, this month is its 5th year anniversary.
Okay.
So even that's
So
become
you have a little bit
distance.
of And then you said it took you 10 years to write the book?
Over 10 years, about 13 years.
Chipping
away.
Did you start right away, or?
Well, I took the dissertation from Binghamton, and in some ways started all over again. And that was back in 2006. So I mean, that's a long time ago. So
the affair was 20 some odd years ago. Is that what? Was that right?
Yes.
Now?
Yeah.
Right.
More than that. Yeah.
Right.
But so even when it was published back in 2019, there was a lot of chronological distance. So it wasn't painful to read it. It was more, I wrote this book and now I'm reading it to people, ouch. But no, it doesn't send me back into kind of any painful memories, no.
Do you think it would have been easier in some ways if you didn't put it out as a memoir and it was just a story?
So I definitely get asked that question a lot too. And I would have, Pete, if there was a way to have done it well, I would have done it. But I tried, like for short periods of time, I tried to either fictionalize it, or it just wasn't working. It wasn't working well. I know people do it, and they're great writers, and they do it. They take what's...
Maybe it would have taken the emotional
the impact maybe for me. Yeah, the impact for...
So you want to go back to where you left off?
Sure. So I'll just read that sentence. So, okay. So we're in the diner, and now I'm going to have like a flashback to the day before. When I'd hung around after morning mass the day before, he admitted that he hadn't been an ideal seminarian. First, he brought up the fact that when he was walking down the stairs in the rectory to meet my sister Janine for the first time, all he could think was, whoever this girl is, she smells really nice. The seminary never smelled like that. It was something he'd already told me, but I pretended it was the first time. Then he told me that sometimes he'd throw enough clothes for the weekend in a laundry bag so the rector would think he was going home for the weekend, but really he was headed to Atlantic City with his friend Matt. Really? I said, disappointed, but also a little turned on. It was something like telling my mother I had sorority meetings on Thursday nights in college when I was really headed for the bars. Then he said, I almost didn't make it to ordination. Really? 3 priests voted me in, 3 didn't, and 1 was indecisive. I never told anyone this before, he said. I never told my mother. Why? I asked, feeling uneasy. I figured once they voted me in, what was the point? How did they convince the indecisive one? One of them said to him, we have a real man here, and you're going to let him get away? Father propped his elbow on the back of the pew, his hand so close to my face he could graze my cheek. Then he added, the indecisive priest later told me that he pictured me in the suburbs with a wife, kids, and picket fence. He said it as if he were fishing for me to say, I do too, as if he were suggesting we get together. He was telling me what he'd been trying to all year. He was hungry, maybe even a little angry. A peaceful priest doesn't take a woman out and talk about how good her sister smells, doesn't repair a single mom's home, and then get nervous when he's asked about it. The split vote made complete sense to me. It was the same ambivalence I pretended I didn't feel. Father was going to help me answer God's call. We were going to be each other's best friend and celibate significant other. I wouldn't have to be alone anymore. I had no idea how much I was fooling myself. Despite the knot in my stomach, I said, I'm glad you wound up here and not the suburbs.
Okay. This is quite a book.
There's a lot to unpack.
Is there a movie
here.
coming up?
Oh, well, that would be something awesome one day if somebody
Right. Who would you want to play you?
Oh, I'm not prepared for that question, Pete. I should have been prepared for that question. Oh, my gosh. I don't know. It'd have to be somebody much younger than me now, right? Because,
right.
yeah.
In the old day, like a young Sandra Bullock could play you.
That's what I've been told. Right.
You look a little bit like her.
Oh, I've been told that before.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not prepared. Good
We'll
question.
have to think about that.
Yeah.
This is totally off the, subject, but we're talking about actresses. I work in a cafe, and I waited on Katie Holmes and didn't realize it.
I saw that post, and I commented on your post. Well, I didn't comment.
Yeah, that's right.
I liked it. Was that just yesterday or this week?
It was yesterday.
Yeah. I saw that.
And my coworker goes, "You know who that was?" Like, who? I was like, "Which one?" I didn't even remember. It was so busy.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't even pay that close attention to the people I'm waiting on because it's a busy store.
Right. Well, I'm sure she appreciated not being
Well,
recognized.
yeah, I think
right?
my coworker said she was dressed in a way where she didn't want to attract attention. She had glasses on and was dressed in a way.
Right. Could I ask where that is?
It's called Hungry Ghost. It's in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay. Cool.
In Park Slope. I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but when was the last time you had any contact with Tom?
With Tom is my stepdad. James.
Did you say his name? I don't remember.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, you only heard his last name, I think. Father James Infanzi is his father. So when the book came out, I didn't notify him about it. He found out about it maybe about a year
Wow.
later.
How did he find out about it?
I guess he kept searching because he knew.
Really?
Before everything was cut off between us, he knew I was he knew I was a writer, and he knew I was writing this story.
Oh, he did.
So I guess periodically he would maybe check to see what was online, and so he found it.
And did he contact you about it, or?
He did. He did.
And what was that like?
By email.
Right.
So we
Sure.
we haven't we haven't. It was actually.
Did he read the book or just know you read it?
He read the book.
Oh, wow.
He read the book.
This is getting juicy.
It was pretty.
That's not that part is not in the book. You're gonna have to add.
No. Right, it doesn't end there. Right, it ends much before that. But it was a pretty decent correspondence in the sense that.
Maybe you need to write a sequel, but like fictionized. Where you
yeah, well, we could finish your thought. I didn't mean to cut you
where
off.
like you get he finds you, he reads the book, and you reconnect. And, no,
you think people? Do you think people would buy it now that they know that I wrote Memoir? So it was a decent.
So I guess you're not Facebook friends.
No. It was a decent correspondence in the sense that. He didn't.
He was okay with it.
He didn't serve me papers.
Right.
I wasn't sued or anything.
Well, would anybody know it was him? I guess.
No.
Really.
I was pretty careful with.
Right.
Except for me, my name, everybody else's name in the book has changed,
right.
and some details,
right.
Just to kind of blur the lines a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. Because
so it's not getting back to him.
Yeah,
I guess he's still a priest.
Well, I'm not even going to comment on that.
Oh, okay.
Right, I'll leave that for the readers. Yeah,
Sure.
I'll leave that for the readers,
Okay.
and also to just give him some
privacy.
Yeah, and also just to keep some privacy for him.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So usually I read one of my poems.
Yeah, please do.
So this is kind of about accepting that when you're older, that everything doesn't have to be perfect, and it's called Things Disposable. I drove into the old mountain town and went to the antique store that's been there longer than most have been alive. I was looking for something, maybe some furniture. Let's say a set of drawers that would be older than me, with cracks in its finish, and legs that wobble, with knobs that had patina, hinges that cried when moved. But a long history of usefulness, a part of the life of generations, maybe even the same family. I would put it in my bedroom and put framed pictures of loved ones on top. The drawers would be filled with the things accumulated in life. It would serve a workman's function, despite its age, and prove the value of something that has longevity in a world that likes things disposable, that you put together with an Allen wrench and instructions written in another language.
Yeah, Pete, I love that. And I read it on Facebook.
Oh, you did?
I did read it. So I'm glad
okay.
you chose that one. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I've been trying, since we met, I've been trying to,
Well,
read
that's
some
nice
of your
you.
work.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But I
what-
love the way that you use that as the metaphor for, appreciating
Yeah.
the value that something gains over time.
Right.
Yeah.
And
being worn, and it's worn.
I'm
it's
trying to
being
tell
worn.
myself to appreciate myself.
Uh-huh.
Because, it's hard, when you start to get towards this stage of life
Mm-hmm.
and you're questioning your longevity and your age and all that.
Yeah.
And things don't physically work the way they used to.
Yeah. And I can picture myself like in one of those vintage shops from
Right.
the opening of the poem.
Yeah. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Because I was recently in Denver and I was near, I'm trying to think where, we went to there's a concert hall that's outside. And I'm forgetting the name for a second, but it's in this really like kind of neat old town. And there was kind of shops like that there.
Right.
So I saw that. It was very visual for me.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
So we're getting towards the end of the show. Have we not covered something really important to you? And
I think that, one thing I'd like to say about what I hope the book conveys to some readers is that, there's value. There could be value in being uncoupled. You could live a full and fulfilling life. And I don't know that that's always understood or
no,
believed.
it's definitely not.
Yeah.
Right.
And certainly none of us is meant to be alone. Like,
Right.
We're meant to have connection and community
Right.
and joy and finding joy and peace, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a significant other.
No, and I think it helps if you're comfortable with yourself.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that's,
and the way your life is.
right. And I would say, Pete, that's the major struggle of celibate
Right.
is that I wasn't like for so many years, I didn't feel enough on my own.
Right.
So I was grasping,
But you can
and-
be in a relationship and have different kind of feelings like that too.
Absolutely.
Right. Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Life's not perfect, and it's just good to accept where you are. And if there's something that's not happy about where you are, you try to change it
Yeah.
or accept it.
Right.
Right. One or
Right.
the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hopefully I'm a reliable narrator
Right.
because I went through that struggle for
Well,
somebody
from
else
what
who
I
might.
heard, you are definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And hopefully if the book could make somebody feel a little less lonely out there, a little bit more understood, then wow, then it was worth the 13 plus years.
Do you have anything coming up that you want to talk about? Are you reading anywhere?
Well, I just came back from a conference, an Italian American Studies conference,
Okay.
and I did a panel with
So
two colleagues.
writing and the connection of writing and your heritage is important to you.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not that that's the only
Right.
venue that I seek out to
Right,
read,
sure.
but yeah, it is. It's important. It's an important part of this book. It's an important part of the first book, and it'll certainly be an important part of the third book. But I was on a panel with two colleagues also who have priests as characters in their book, so we had that in common, and I read there. At the moment, I don't have any readings lined up.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully I'll see you at the Italian American
Yes, I
Writers
plan on
Association the next time.
Yeah.
I have a busy stretch coming up, but I'm going to try to make that.
Okay.
And I think they're going to play the theme song.
Thanks so much for having me, Pete.
Well, you've been a great guest, and this is embarrassing.
No worries.
To ask you.
Giura. That's what you did, Giura.
Actually, it kind of makes sense now. Well, Maria Giura, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful writing and stories. And I think people are going to want to go out and get that book. It's fantastic. It's really...
Thank you.
It's quite a story that you've written. And your poetry book, too. And thank you for giving me a copy.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to Storytelling on Orchard Street. I'm Pete Salamita, and we're in the broadcast studios of P&T Knitwear Bookstore. We thank you all for reading, listening, watching, however you're getting this on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and such. Thank you, and thank you again, Maria.
Thank you, Pete. This was so much fun.
Yes, it was, definitely.
Thanks.